I'm sure you probably know about like the history of Stoicism
Sure.
and how it started with like primarily with Zeno of Scythium, right?
Yep.
And the whole story of him and getting shipwrecked and everything. Would you say there's a lot in his life or just like in his philosophy that you relate to?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I mean, yeah, Zeno was interesting. As you mentioned, he had a shipwreck and then
Yeah,
was kind of washed up on the beach thinking what's he going to do with his life and how he's going to deal with that. Basically, he had a fortune. He had very expensive things on board that he was going to sell, and of course, the storm had other plans for him. So he's sitting on the beach thinking, "How am I going to deal with this?" And yeah, he basically decided that riches is kind of an indifferent that you don't really need it to be happy, and that kind of started this whole Stoic philosophy. So yeah, I mean, obviously, I resonate a lot with the philosophy. I think it's a very grounded, humble, but also most importantly, a practical philosophy. So people
yeah.
can really learn a little bit about Stoicism very fast and apply it to their lives that same day. And so it's incredibly beneficial, and it's also incredibly deep. So it's practical, but you can also spend the rest of your life digging deeper and learning about it. So that's what I really like about it.
That's what I like the word that you use, practical, because I feel like a lot of philosophies sometimes that are out there, they're too idealistic and not practical enough. But obviously with Stoicism, a lot of it is mostly to do with your own like mind and head. So I feel like that is obviously the one thing you can control. So that it doesn't make sense that it would be practical.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of philosophies and religions that they tend to be a bit too focused on the supernatural elements of the religion and philosophy, and to each their own. I certainly wouldn't claim that Stoicism is the best thing for everyone. If people want to follow Christianity or Islam, I mean, that's completely within their rights. But however, for me, at least for my disposition, I like things that are really practical. I mean, I'm an engineer by profession, so the practical part of it of Stoicism really is really what resonates with me. I like to be able to apply it to my day to day life.
No, I like that. I like that. So obviously like we are fortunate enough to know what Stoicism is, but if you were to explain it to someone that's never probably heard of it, how would you explain that? How would you explain what Stoicism really is? It's like, I
Yeah,
guess in a summary.
yeah, I'll put it as simply as I can. So, Stoicism really claims that the only way that you can really find happiness and deep meaning in life, and they would call this flourishing, is essentially by adopting a good character, by being a good person, essentially. So, its complete focus is on virtue, is what they would call it. But really, virtue can be sort of this weird word sometimes. But the best way to think about it, I find, for modern people is just be a good person and do the right thing. And what that means is that you do the right thing in a way that's good for yourself, but also for your family and also for the community and also for the world. And then built into that, which I have to mention because it's what brings a lot of people to Stoicism, is this thing called dichotomy of control, which means that you only really focus on the things that's within your control, and you try not to be too concerned about the things outside of your control. Not that you don't care about those things, but that really in your day-to-day life you have to accept that there's a lot of things that it's really just chaos, and so there's a very small amount of things in our day-to-day life that we fully have control over. And so the Stoics would say that's what you have focus on, and that's really character. You have control over your character, and that's what you should basically put your focus on, and not be too concerned about things like the weather and other people's actions. You definitely care about other people, but you have to detach yourself from other people's actions because it's not up to you.
I like that. I like that. So obviously there's a lot of Stoics out there, like throughout history, obviously. What I mean. So obviously we talked about Zeno, right? And then there's obviously Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, right? Just to name a few. I think even Epictetus, if I'm not mistaken. Right?
Yep.
So out of all of those, like, is there one that you would say that probably like you relate to the most?
Yeah, I tend to my favorite Stoic tends to be the one that I'm reading at the time, but I'd have to say it's either Marcus Aurelius or Seneca. For those who don't know, Marcus Aurelius, he's just a fascinating character because he was the Roman emperor, and at that time, the Roman Empire rather was the most powerful on earth. So he was the
Yeah,
most powerful person on earth, and has this journal basically that he wrote reminding himself to be humble and to be a good person and to think of other people despite having all of that power. And I think it's a hard thing for people to grasp, but when you have that much power, it's so incredibly hard to be humble. I
yeah,
mean, you can certainly see this as you become a little bit more successful in life. You if you're if you're conscious of yourself, you'll feel your ego start to grow a little bit. And then if you extract that out and you imagine that you're the most powerful person on the planet, and that
yeah,
being Marcus Aurelius, I mean, the amount of humility and strength and virtue that you would have to be someone like that who's still reminding himself to be a good person every day, it's just incredible. So I would say I have a lot of admiration for Marcus Aurelius, probably out of the rest, but I do like them all. I got to say, especially their
yeah,
writing. You know,
yeah. No, that's for sure. I'm assuming you've probably read Meditations.
yeah, of course, yeah, several
Yeah.
times,
One of the, I guess, like funnier like criticisms of Meditations tends to be that it's too repetitive, right?
yeah,
But obviously, it's like it wasn't really meant to be published as a book. It's just a journal. So obviously, the day-to-day life you live tends to be sometimes repetitive, right? So it's kind of like he's just writing, I guess, in a way, he's talking about his life, right? But he's also kind of reminding himself to stay on the path, right?
yes. Well, that's the thing is, and you're absolutely right. It was a journal. It wasn't supposed to be a book. And so if you can imagine whoever you are listening to this, if you're an individual, you have things that you struggle with, some tendencies that you struggle with. Maybe you tend to sleep in a little bit too late. Maybe you tend to grab your phone too much. And if you're trying to fight those bad habits, what you have to do is you have to remind yourself to fix those bad habits every day. And so
Yeah,
if you were to write a journal, you would probably bring up every day, okay, this is something I struggle with. Remind myself not to grab my phone every 5 seconds. And it's probably something that you're going to be very repetitive about because you're trying to drill in that habit. And so Marcus Aurelius was just a person at the end of the day. And that's exactly what he was doing in that journal. It's like he had tendencies just like the rest of us do, and he's trying to remind himself so he can drill in these habits and this virtue. And that does end up being repetitive as a reader, but to me, it points to the humane element of Marcus Aurelius. Like he was an actual person. He wasn't this god, this sage.
yeah,
He was a person that struggled with things, and I kind of like that, to be honest.
yeah. I feel like that's a lot more like even though he was a king, right? It makes him a lot more relatable, right?
Yeah,
Like if you read like his life story, like he went through suffering just like anyone else. Like he lost, if I'm not mistaken, his wife at some point, his kids, right? Obviously, like at that time he was fighting the Germanic tribes, right? And like, he was losing soldiers left and right. So, had to deal with a lot of problems. Because like thing is I think a lot of people will see a king and they will think that automatically this individual is spoiled. But the thing is, when you are a king, there's also a lot of like burden of responsibility on you. And
right.
one of the ways that when you read his life, it's like it kind of shows like how like a proper king should lead things in his life.
Yeah. No, I think he's a model for everyone, for all of us in